body, she goes from popular dance to rumba, and there's also sacred dance embedded in her body. And it's a perfect example of what we're talking about when we talk about salsa, popular dance. The roots of that are embedded in folklore, and knowing the people from the African diaspora, particularly these sort of micro studies in Cuba, really it's an international phenomena. It's Cuban music and Cuban dance that we call salsa, but it's an international phenomena, and we really got to see that embodied in one sort of micro study of a person, of a young woman.
We saw earlier, this evening was phenomenal dancers and phenomenal drummers. Now, as I came up as a percussionist, there was no institution to learn how to play this. We learned this in the streets. They learned it the same way in the streets. That's why they became the percussionists and the dancers that they are. What you didn't see was the older guy that was speaking, Louis Chacon, danced with his granddaughter. Louis, at his age, dances like a 20-year-old. And they grow up in this. They wake up playing and they go to bed playing. When I was there, 7 o'clock in the morning, all I heard was music. Somewhere between, as you walk the streets, they out in the streets playing rumbas, or they somewhere doing salsa. They don't like that word salsa. They like to call it montuno or danzón. But salsa is, they say it's a New York thing, and it is. I grew up around the word salsa and all the Latin bands in New York. So when we studied the percussion, congas, shekere, and djembe, I don't want to leave that drum out, because djembe was a strong part of the percussion diaspora up in New York. We all learned it in the street. There's no institution for this, even though we're teaching it now, but we're not teaching it the way we learned it, because we don't have enough time to do that. We only get an hour and a half to teach a class, or sometimes even shorter, and it's just one day a week. I get a different class, like Mondays is this, Tuesday is djembe, Wednesday is djembe, and Thursday is djembe, but they're 2 different classes. So you don't really get the full life of how to learn how to play this drum, these drums here. But when we came up, we was in the streets playing every day. We was at somebody's house or somebody's studio learning how to play. So that's what we got out of this, and that's what you saw, basically in this movie.
Hi, everybody. The blossom of Africa is alive and well 90 miles from the USA. And that is exactly the first time I went there in 1993. I felt like I arrived in Africa, because to me it felt like the whole island pulsed on a rhythm. You hear the word clave a lot throughout this film. Clave is a beautiful, extremely complex system of, it's an organizing rhythm that pulls all the parts together. There's a lot of different, a number of different clave forms there. But to me, it is like the film was the beauty of African music. Drum and dance talking to each other, call and response, rhythms that are layered on top of each other, connections to language. We covered a lot of ground of folkloric rhythms in this beautiful film. And I was born in Charlotte, North Carolina. I did not have the gift of growing up with in my bones, in my blood. I have to also give some tribute right now to Baba Chuck Davis, because he helped to open that door for me to begin to know some of these incredibly complex, profoundly beautiful art forms, and deep beyond the center of the earth. I think this film was a beautiful celebration of those African roots. And the other thing that comes to me most strongly is change. What's the last thing he said in the film? It's up to us to support the preservation of these beautiful forms. These forms don't happen anywhere but in Cuba. Other places have beautiful forms too, but it is the unique history of Cuba that helped to develop these, and we hope that with the rapidly changing dynamic of Cuba's position in the world, that these art forms will continue to grow and still preserve their roots. Improvisation! And I'll just say, complex. Try it sometime. One little piece of what they're doing, they make it like butter. Make it like butter.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
So I'm Puerto Rican, so I grew up around this music. So most of the stuff that I saw in the video, I saw myself, because that's Puerto Rican Cuba art. Actually, we call it those are the two wings of the same bird, right? So there's a lot of similarities, but I guess reflecting first, I agree with all the comments that my colleagues just made about the documentary. As she said, I think it's up to us to preserve this. So there's three things that if thinking about this, this is the first time that I'm watching this, so three things that I have in my mind now. Number one, which is something that I always tell my students, is the power of music. Because I don't think we wouldn't be talking about what happened to all these people that came from Africa if it wasn't because of the music. The music is one of the things, or perhaps the one thing that has survived all the oppression and all the injustice and all the horrible things that these people have to endure. And we're still celebrating them and remembering them because of the music. So the music has an incredible and powerful meaning for us, and for the people who perform this music. And then as the documentary said, and also as verbally said, I think it's up to us to do everything that we can to preserve this. The one thing that struck me, and it doesn't surprise me because it happens almost in every country, is the fact that most governments don't support their own tradition. They much rather support something foreign and something from somewhere else than supporting their own culture. To me, it's shocking that all the artists were talking how people in Cuba don't have access. In the schools, they don't teach this music, at least with the level of compromise and dedication that it should be given. And then the last thing is, and this is sort of unrelated to those other topics, is I think if we're gonna try to understand what salsa is, and to me it's one of probably the most diverse and interesting genres of the 20th century. And nowadays we often use the word globalization and cross-culturation, but I think salsa is probably one of the perfect examples of what exactly that means. Because we just saw one face of how this music was put together. There's so many other faces that also contribute to what we now call salsa. It'd be interesting to also see how other drumming cultures, like the drumming culture from Colombia, from Puerto Rico with the bomba plena, and many others, and Brazil, how those other cultures that also contribute to what we now call this beautiful music that we call salsa. And as Bradley said, it's a term that is actually not accepted in Cuba. I was actually struck and taken by the fact that they were using that term so commonly, and it seems, if you don't know, it seems like that's an accepted term, but for the most part, they don't really like that word salsa, and I understand why, because in essence, they much rather call the music song, since the roots of the music are song. than calling it salsa. And salsa is nothing else than a commercial term that they came up with in the late 60s, early 70s to advertise all these different rhythms, which for the most part, the root comes from Cuba. So that's kind of my take on it. I hope that wasn't too long.
No. You did great. I think the panel really covered the waterfront within the context of looking at this film relative to how it gave us an insight into the music, the dance, the spirituality, and I like the point that Bradley brought up about its rootedness in the streets and how we consistently got that being told and shared with us, how you also saw children, youth, being exposed to the culture and handling it quite well. What we want to do is open the floor up for questions from the audience, because there may be some other insights that we want to examine. So, are there some questions out there in the audience? We've got one right down here.
I went to Cuba 3 years ago.
Just a second. We've got a microphone.
I went to Cuba 3 years ago to study dance, actually with Baba Chuck. And in roaming around the island, it was clear that in different regions, just like the U.S., people did things a little differently. And everybody in Cuba acknowledged that song was like the root of salsa. However, when we went to, for example, Guantanamo, they did a whole lecture, and they say they gave tribute to more than rumba and orisha. There are other dances like Pilon and Chanwi, which they say are the mother of song as well. So if you go around the island, you start seeing other roots. There's more than rumba. There's even more than what we saw, is what I'm trying to say. That's it. If anybody knows more about Chanwi and Pilon, I know that Pilon is African-based. It's a harvest dance. They come together, and it's one of the oldest forms of dance on the island.
Anybody else?
I could talk real loud.
Yeah. Did I miss somebody?
So my question is, has anybody ever done any like tracing back to the continent of Africa? Like, can someone in Africa today relate to what you see in Cuba or in Colombia, Puerto Rico? I mean, is the similarity still there, or are they distinctly different because of the diaspora?
Well, go ahead, Bradley, and I'll follow up.
Well, Afro-Cuban music comes from Central Africa, based out of the Congo. So a lot of their music that you hear in the rumba form, the rumba wawancos, the yambos, it's basically Congolese music, is what it is. So yeah, it's traced back to the Congo and to Central Africa, and then West Africa, Nigeria, and the Congo.
But would people in Congo and Nigeria recognize what they see in Cuba as theirs?
Yes, they do, because I just talked to a drummer today by the name of Plain. He's from the Congo, so he knows. He knows the rumbas, he knows the wawancos. I had him in one of my shows at Duke, and we sat down and played this in class one day, and he fell right in. So a lot of their rhythms that they play on the ngoma drum is also the same rhythms that they use on the conga drum.
Actually, she just asked the same question that I had.
Just a second. Let her. She's going to respond.
To the first question?
Yeah.
Just a second. Go ahead.
Was his question related to the first?
Is your question related to the first or the second?
To the last.
Well, let's go ahead and deal with the last one, then you can come back to hers. How's that?
No, I was just gonna say she asked the exact question that I was gonna ask. So thank you. In terms of like, in terms of the blues coming from Wasalu in Mali, you know, I was curious to know if there was, a direct descendant in terms of the movement and whatnot, but you answered the question. So I'm assuming it's Palo, it's Palo in Congo, and then
From the Congo.
and then Nigeria. So that's the descendant. Right. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, Paulo comes out of the Congo.
Right.
It's called Paulo Mayumbe. where in Nigeria is just totally different. What they do.
So just to touch a little bit on the first question about, clearly there are many entities to salsa, and I don't think the intention of the movie is to say that salsa came out of rumba, quote unquote, like that's a direct connection. But also, if you look at what we're saying is maybe son or Cuban dancing, if you look back to the casino, the circle dances, and the partnering dances, danson, which is sort of like maybe the waltz hit percussion and sort of started to become something else to what we call salsa. But also casino is considered like a container for many. There's mambo is in the casino, rumba is in casino. You get sometimes a little bit of breakdancing, pilon is in casino, all of those. So if you look to the roots of casino, then you get to see like what other things salsa, what people are calling salsa, what it derives from. But that it's also like you could say a container for popular dance, for traditional dance, but also for innovation. And so during the fifth, what we would call like a sweet 16, the quinceañera, the party for when you turn 15 years old, those used to be choreographed, and then people started to want more spontaneity and innovate, and that was a chance for people to show something new and try something new. So it's not like you could say a set, like salsa consists of A, B, C, and D. It's constantly evolving, but it has all of those roots inside of it. So basically, yes to what you were saying, and even more.
We're going to take one last question before we have our descarga, so you get to hear some of this music live. Yes.
Okay, so in the film we saw there was los palos, and I just wanted to know whether there were the similarities and differences between los palos from Cuba and los palos from the Dominican Republic.
One is gonna take the chance at that. Do you know the difference?
Yes,
A ver.
Well, I mean,
it's impossible to answer this problem because in Dominican Republic and in Cuba and in other countries, everybody Afro-descendant have one expression of the information culture. And when one person is live in República Dominicana, is possibly conservation the action cultural. In one tradition is similar the expression orality for the grandfather, for the son, and is continued for this time now. And in Cuba, many people of the Africa is concentration here. In moment for for example, in Cuba, the concentration of the Africa is the many countries is concentration. Is created one expression about the palenque. The one palenque is one resistance for the many years ago in montaña. Is in montaña. This resistance is communication many persons, the different countries, and unification of the language. In many years ago in Cuba, the family is to talk about the other language. My language is Spanish, and when it's necessary to talk of the language of the Africa, 500 years ago, this is very easy for me about the Spanish or the English or the other language. This is raíces of the Afro. When other person is sit down for the one conduct, is to just the expression this emotion. You understand? This is a problem.
Also, if I may interject, the slave trade, also depending on the country, you know, that may vary from Caribbean island to Caribbean island, but there are a lot of similarities too.
One of the things that's so amazing to me about Cuba is that there are so many different forms that are like beautifully distinct from each other. And each of those forms, I mean, people trace them back to specific ethnic groups in Africa. I did a piece once that used Dominican palo, and I found it to be night and day. Of course, with Cuban palo, there are different palo forms. You know, macuta, yucca is connected to it. There's forms that are in 6, and there's macutas more in 4/4. I think of Cuban palo as really kind of being like a fast 6, right? The Dominican form was not anything that I recognized. It had a whole different flavor. So it's the beauty of these traditions being able to, in a way, grow in isolation and maintain their identities. So now we have this rich palette that today is expanding and creating and combining, and that's it.
Thank you guys so much. I mean, this has been awesome. Now, you can't ask a panelist of musicians and artists not to perform. So, therefore, we're just going to have an example of what a descarga may be. We could be here all night with a descarga if we let it. But this is going to be a little example of what it can be, just so you can feel it live. And it can transform. So I'm going to leave them to it.
unfortunately, we have to be out of here at a certain time. Yeah, just when y'all was getting started. Well, what I want to say is this. Lizette has been working very hard on getting this film here for quite some time. So first, let's thank Lizette Cruz. Diamante Incorporated has been doing programs here in Cary for quite some time with their festival Ritmo Latino, among others. And then they celebrate Latino culture every fall with their Diamante Awards, so keep your ears out for that. And you can support them by also offering up a donation as you leave for this program. I want to thank our panelists again, Juan, Beverly, Bradley, and Andrea. I'm Daryl Stover, and we thank you for coming out tonight. Everybody be safe.
Thank you.